not moving food around in their mouth very well. Their oral motor skills are poor. Usually, by the time I see them, they have poor jaw strength, poor jaw stability.
Are meal times a serious struggle? Does your child eat a limited number of foods? Does your child eliminate entire food groups? Are you tired of waiting for them to just grow out of it? Welcome to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater, where you'll learn strategies to help your picky eater expand their palate. With Christine Marati-Yoder, a pediatric feeding specialist, speech pathologist, mom of a child with feeding issues, and author of Mealtime Mindset. Let's get started. Here's Christine.
Hi, thanks so much for joining. My name's Christine, and I am your host. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to get started today. So this is April in 2023, and the theme for this month is really oral motor based. So, of course, how we always relate it to feeding, but I kind of try to put like a different spin or theme onto each month. So, what we're going to really talk about today is like, why are your kids even picky? Like, why are they even picky in the first place? And there's actually a few different reasons. And I feel like in different podcast episodes, I've touched upon all of these things before, but I just want to kind of bring it all together for people. So, you know, most of when we do our evaluations, our in person evaluations, we talk about um, your history. And the history starts from like really conception to, all the way to now. So we talk about pregnancy, we talk about, was there any sort of trauma during birth? Are you born with torticollis? Um, what was feeding like in the early days? Was it a struggle? Was it easy? Did you have to try 4 different bottles or 40 different bottles? Did you need a lactation person? Did you give up on breastfeeding because you didn't have a good supply? These are all things that we ask about because they all relate to why your child is picking out. So a lot of people think that they only became picky starting from, sometimes we hear like 1, 3, 2. Usually it's under 3 that they start to become pickier. It's not usually after that. Of course, it can. We talk in a different episode. There are some periods of time developmentally that children will naturally become picky, but not to the degree that we're talking about here with our extreme picky eaters, our RFID population, if you will. And if you've never heard of RFID, it stands for avoidant restrictive food intake. So it's really a technical term for extreme picky eaters. So these are kids that are eating, less than 20 foods, probably even less than 10 foods, um, all sort of brown, more like snack foods, not even real, substance type foods. Um, so, a lot of parents will say, they were eating everything up until they turned 1.5 or 2 or 1. Um, that's not always the case. But we do hear that a lot, and they're very confused about why all of a sudden, why are they picky now? They were eating everything. I don't understand. So that's what we're going to kind of go into. And I'll tell you that even though you might have seen it drop off at a certain age, and that age differs again for different kids, but just because you saw it drop off at a certain age does not mean that it didn't actually originate much, much earlier. And that's kind of what I'm going to go into today. So, when we do our case history, we ask a lot about those very early questions. What was birth like? What was that first feeding like? What about the first few weeks of feeding? Is there colic? Is there gassiness? Was there difficulty latching on? Did they do better on breast? Did they do better on bottle? Everyone has a little bit of a different circumstance, of course. But what we're trying to determine is what were their oral motor skills like at the time? Because when you're an infant, you have basically one job. Your job is to eat, right? So when we were, when I was trained as a speech pathologist, that's what we learned. A baby's job is to eat. They've got the one job. So if they're struggling with it, there's something blocking them because that's a natural, you were born with that. It is a human instinct, a survival instinct. They are born to eat. And when they're struggling to eat, we have to figure out the why. And, sometimes it's not as obvious. And I'll tell you, in the cases it's not as obvious, it's usually a second or third child. And sometimes that is because if mom was breastfeeding before and they breastfeed again, they have their supply is a little bit better the second, third time around. Your body is kind of used to, okay, like I've got this. It's built up some muscle memory, so to speak, and it's easier for that milk to just flow. Whereas with the first child, sometimes it's more of a learning curve and it's harder to kind of get that milk flowing. So it's easy for that supply to drop very fast. And that's just kind of what I found by all of the, hundreds of interviews that I've done of parents of picky eaters as they've come through our clinic. That's just something that I've just kind of noticed and observed, that it seems to be a little bit less obvious with the second and third childs, or subsequent children, I should say. But there are a lot of those early signs that people miss. That tells me, okay, that's going to be a problem later on. So if they had trouble latching for any reason, if mom had a low supply of breast milk, if there was difficulty with different bottles, if there was reflux, those are all very big red flags to me that there's going to be a later issue with feeding for sure. It's not 100%, but we do see kids that are in infancy, but a lot of the kids we see, have passed that stage and of course they've made it past it and it's all great, but now they have a problem. And looking back on their history, there's always a couple of those signs in there. Very rarely is there less than, 3 or 4 of those red flags for me. There's always something there. So there are clues in their infancy, in their history of what their issue was with feeding. So, what we're going to do is we're going to talk more about all of that. Um, when they're struggling to eat as an infant, what happens is it tells me that they have some oral motor challenges. And those challenges don't necessarily go away. What happens often is they're masked by something. So, um, they might be really struggling with breastfeeding, and then mom goes to the doctor and they say, "Why don't you just do bottle feeding then? Sounds like breastfeeding's not going to work out for you." So they go to a bottle and the bottle is easier, problem solved, right? Quote unquote. But it's not solved because they shouldn't have had trouble breastfeeding in the first place. Um, Sometimes it's that reflux, it's that food trauma. So if you should go back and listen to the episode on food trauma for sure, if your child had reflux, but that reflux creates a negative relationship between food. It's like, okay, things come into my mouth and then my stomach hurts. Things come into my mouth and then my stomach hurts. And then it's like, okay, I don't want anything to come into my mouth. And you might think, well, that was years ago and they were eating and then something happened, right? I'm telling you, they're all related. So yes, they, that might have happened, and then they did kind of seemingly get over it and then move on to solids and everything seemed okay. Um, but the reason I find, and this is kind of like the crux of it, I guess, and I really, I hope that this has been easy enough for people to follow because it's a topic that kind of it's easy to get scattered when you talk about this, and Sometimes when you know so much about something, you just like you go off on like little tangents. So I apologize if this was not super clear. But um, what I've really have, I guess, kind of honed as my like theory is that when a child has any sort of oral motor issues, they're present from birth. Always, they're you're always present from birth, and those oral motor issues usually translate into a negative food experience at some point. So I'll give you an example. Let's just say your child was eating steamed carrots and they loved steamed carrots and things were going great. It was their favorite food. Okay. This happened actually to my son, not specifically with carrots, it was with spinach, but it was his favorite food, spinach. Let's just say they were eating a vegetable. And then all of a sudden, one day, they just weren't. And they didn't choke on it. They didn't, nothing crazy happened that you would be like, I don't understand. Like yesterday, you liked it. Today, you hate it. What's happening? Um, and that's just what happens, I think, to a lot of parents. They're like very confused. Like, okay, you just liked it the other day. Why are you not eating it now? And the reason is, I believe, um, after seeing so many mouths of children, is that okay, they're not moving food around in their mouth very well. Their oral motor skills are poor. Usually, by the time I see them, they have poor jaw strength, poor jaw stability, and stability means that your jaw doesn't slide around. So, like, if you imagine your bottom jaw going left and left and right, as you talk, as you uh, chew, think, whatever. It shouldn't be sliding around constantly. Um, your tongue strength is usually pretty poor, right? There's 8 different muscles in your tongue, and usually there's several of them that end up not being very strong. Um, so yes, so when we have those kids, I see that they have poor oral motor skills at their present time. But my theory is that when they were younger, right, they still had these issues from birth that probably were never addressed. So what happens is when they take in a piece of food, maybe that one piece was a little bit harder than normal. Maybe it was a little bit bigger than normal. For whatever reason, their their mouth wasn't moving that food around in a way that made them feel safe and feel comfortable. So, what my theory is that it created a negative reaction to that food. So, in the same way that if you threw a food up, right, you wouldn't want to eat that food probably again, at least not for a long time. If you choked on a food, right? If you have something traumatic happen with a food, sometimes you push that food away. And depending on your own psyche, some people they're not bothered by that in one bit, right? They might choke on a food, they might throw up a food and the next day they're back to eating it no problem. But not everyone, right? Some people, they have that traumatic experience and they're like, "No way. I'm never doing that again." So, basically at a subconscious level, they create in their mind this negative association with food. This food is no longer safe in my mind, right? So I had this carrot. I couldn't move it around in my mouth. It's not safe for me to eat this carrot anymore. I'm not eating it again. And then boom, carrots are out, right? It could even be more general than that. It could even be more, well, I'm not eating orange foods anymore. Every time I eat an orange food, I have this terrible feeling in my mouth. I'm not eating those anymore, right? And the foods that drop off first are the foods that are the most fibrous, which are meats and vegetables, followed by fruits, but meats and vegetables. And they take the most complex oral motor skills to break down, right? Because you have to be able to chew for an extended period of time sometimes. You have to be able to move the food from the left to the right, from the right to the left, back into the middle of the tongue. to swallow it all down in one bite. So the kids that we see in our clinic, when they take a bite of food, I say, "Okay, open your mouth. You swallowed." There's still food all over their mouth. There's remnants. We call oral residue. There's oral residue all over their mouth. So what does that tell me? Okay, you're not swallowing the food properly. There's still food left over. So to me, that says, okay, at some point you had a bad experience with a food, right? So a fibrous food like carrots, let's just say, if you have a remnant of carrot, that's going to be like a little bit more, it's thicker. It's not, it doesn't just digest with your saliva. Yes, your saliva breaks it down, but not in the same way that it breaks down bread, that it breaks down, meltable solids like puffs and Cheerios and cereal. Those easy to break down things, the kids don't even feel them. So I'm like, "Do you know there's food in your mouth right now?" A lot of times they say no because they don't feel it. It broke down to such a degree that it doesn't bother them, right? That's why they're eating those foods still. Okay, that's why those are the foods that are left. Those are the safe foods for them. Now, if there was remnants of carrots in their mouth, they would probably feel that. And what are they feeling? That's not safe. That's uncomfortable. And it's at such a subconscious level again that they're not making that connection. Like, you know, there's still food in my mouth. Maybe I should swallow again. Maybe that's why I don't like this food. That's not happening. It's not even happening for adults, right? Because we've had adults that can't explain why they don't like that food. They just know they don't like it, right? So that's, what it comes down to, what our picky eaters for me, what it comes down to is poor oral motor skills from the beginning, from birth. So we have to diagnose and figure out, okay, well, what are the muscles that are weak? What are we going to target? What do we need to work on? What do we need to improve and build skill with? And then we have to address the fear that has developed, right? So there is now a psychological piece to this. Sometimes a behavioral piece will develop, right? Where they'll start crying or throwing food or whatever because they are not going to engage with that food. It's not safe, right? This is how our species has evolved. This is how it is so ingrained in us that our brain is just trying to protect us with fear. And that's what happens. They've developed a fear response to food, but the etiology, the origin of the fear is not originally just in their mind, psychological. I believe the origin is oral motor based. And sometimes I believe that oral motor piece also creates a sensory piece. Now, sensory can stand on its own leg there. And sometimes, especially kids with sensory processing disorders or are on the autism spectrum that have a lot of sensory issues, that piece can almost stand on its own that, oh, I don't like this texture. And any food that's that texture, I am going to eliminate because I feel that it's not safe, right? So that's another piece. But I feel 90% of the time, the origin is oral motor. So even if you have that negative experience with food, right? So what's tied to that food? There's a color tied to that food, right? So the carrot was orange. The carrot was hard. Maybe it was wet. Maybe it was dry, whatever it is, you're going to tie the sensory properties of that food that you deemed not safe, and you're going to then start to develop some sensory responses like, oh, I don't like yellow foods. Okay. And a perfect example of this is, I know an adult that has told me, an adult, a tough guy. He's like a big, tough guy. He says, I don't eat purple foods. I don't eat green foods. I don't eat those. Right. So it doesn't always go away. Because he's going to be 40 soon, and he hasn't gotten over this yet. And to just to say, well, I don't eat foods that are green. I don't eat foods that are purple. That's not a logical response, right? We know that that doesn't make any kind of sense. Why would you eliminate that whole color group? But why would you eliminate a whole food group? Why would you eliminate all vegetables, all chicken, or all meat? Sorry. Um, you know, it's that it's your brain has told you that those foods are not safe for you, and your logical mind can't understand that because your subconscious mind has taken over and it has said, nope, we're going to put a hold on those. Those are not safe for your body. So, what we do in our assessment of where the issues are and just in general, our feeding assessment is we do a whole oral motor assessment. We have to determine what muscles, um, where is the issue? Where is the breakdown happening? What muscles need to be targeted. And then we also have to address the sensory. Where are you sensory wise? And then your mindset. What do you think about food? What's your response to fear? Um, so, and then, if there is, sometimes there is a gut issue, right? If you had reflux, or if you still have reflux, or if you have food intolerances, that is another layer. So you have to understand that they all play together, but, they're each their own separate little beast. And I tell you this not to scare you and being like overwhelm you, like, oh my God, like I think my kid has all of those things. And like, how am I going to fix all of those things? And that's not what this is about. It's about education, and knowledge is power, right? So you can't fix a problem if you don't know where it started. So my job is to teach you, hey, this is where it started. This is how we're going to start turning everything around. Because if you don't know, then you can't fix it. So, and all you need to do to start fixing it is take one baby step at a time, one day at a time. You don't have to fix all of the things in one day. It's never going to happen, and depending on how many of those things are at play together, and how long they've been at play together will determine the length of the therapy, the length of, or what type of a program we're going to put together for you. Because sometimes you need to talk to a dietitian, or we might need to do some gut testing to see what's going on in the gut. We might be doing some play based therapy. We might be doing a good amount of oral motor therapy. And then it depends on the age, right? So a 3-year-old is not going to sit and do oral motor therapy. So we have to kind of be creative, and we focus more on the play at that point and decreasing the fear and modeling, what to do oral motor wise. So we have different strategies for different age groups because you have to address all the different age groups in different ways. Um, so it's really important to know these things and know how they all come together so that we can make some real progress. Because if you only address one little tiny piece of the puzzle, or if you're only, if you're working on, celery, and all you're going to do is, well, first we kissed it, now we're licking it. Now we're putting it on our teeth. You're only addressing one small, like little piece of this puzzle, and we're missing a whole bunch of other stuff. Um, so, I hope that this kind of helped bring all of those pieces of the puzzle together and gave you some clarity. And, if you're like, oh, wow, I don't know. Like, I don't know. How am I supposed to know if they're doing or moving food around in their mouth well enough? And I find that a lot of parents tell me, oh, they're great with chewing. They chew fine. But when I look at them, I'm like, oh, no, no, we're missing a few things here. Yeah, I see their jaw moving, but they don't have endurance. They don't have strength. They don't have jaw stability. The only things that they can break down are easy things to break down to start, right? If I gave them a piece of meat, they'd have to spit it right back out because they wouldn't be able to break it down before it lost all of its flavor, before it just became something unappealing altogether. And that's kind of like what happens with our kids, right? We find they spit stuff out a lot. it's because they're not able to chew and break it down well enough. Um, so, what we do with foodology feeding is we assess and we just do a really, really comprehensive in-depth assessment to figure all that out. And if you join our parent course, that assessment is something that everyone will get because you can't you if you don't know what the issues are for your child, how are you going to start remediating them, right? Um, that's like sometimes a problem with Facebook groups and parent groups is, parents might give great advice that worked for their kid, but your kid's a little bit different. So that advice might not translate, right? If you only have one tool in your toolbox and you only use those tools, if you have, a project that requires different tools, you won't be able to help. So that's why it's really important. We do have a lot of tools in our toolbox, a lot of training to hopefully get you to see these progress and see these shifts. We're really excited to help. We're going to be launching our Picky Plate to Clean Slate course really soon, and I'm really excited. I feel like it's going to help so many people and hopefully give them a lot of the answers and support that they need to change their child's meal times for the better. Um, if you find that you need more support, feel free to check us out on foodologyfeeding.com, or we also have free tips and freebies on our Instagram page at Foodology Feeding. And as always, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Really helps and gets people to find us a little bit more easily and find the help that they're looking for. But I do hope that this was interesting and enlightening and, showed you some maybe different sides of feeding that maybe you hadn't thought of before. Maybe it'll help you put some of the pieces together for your own child. And I just want to thank you so much again, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater. To learn more about achieving your child's feeding goals, check out Christine's website at foodologyfeeding.com. And be sure to tune in next time to How to Unpicky Your Picky Eater.